The stars didn't twinkle here. Not in this dead corner of the galaxy where the war had already swallowed hundreds of civilizations whole. Battles had burned planets into ash. Space was littered with the broken hulls of ships, floating coffins with no one left to mourn them. And into this cursed stretch of nothing came us. The human fleet didn't arrive quietly. Our engines thundered like gods screaming through the void. 13 massive warships emerged from sublight, their hulls black as obsidian, marked with the red insignia of Earth Command. Smaller vessels, fighters, destroyers, and mobile carriers unfolded from their shadow. It was like watching a storm take shape from silence, a dark force rolling in, unapologetic. On the bridge of the flagship Reckoner, Admiral Thorne stood still, hands clasped behind his back, watching the enemy fleet on the hollow display. Thousands of ships, all belonging to the Zarn Collective, inhuman monsters of bone and plasma who had conquered 12 systems in just 3 months. Entire colonies had gone silent. Civilians, soldiers, diplomats. It didn't matter. The Zarn didn't negotiate. They consumed. But now they faced something different. They faced us. "Status report," Thorne said, his voice low, calm, and cold. "All ships accounted for, sir," Commander Rivas replied. "Weapons hot, shields full, fighters ready to deploy on your mark." Thorne didn't blink. He studied the Zarn formation. They were tight, confident, arrogant even. They had never faced humans in open space before. They'd picked off border colonies and fringe mining outposts, easy prey. But this was the core fleet. This was humanity's answer, and it wasn't going to be diplomatic. "Open channel," Thorne said. A soft beep. The channel opened, broadcasting to every ship within range, Zarn and human alike. "This is Admiral John Thorne of the Terran Fleet," he said flatly. "You entered our space. You killed our people. You thought we were weak. Today we show you your mistake. We are humanity, and we do not kneel." The comms cut. Rivas smirked. "That'll get their attention." Thorne didn't smile back. "Number this, Will." He raised a hand. "Deploy all squadrons. Lock missile pods. Fire at will." The fleet came alive. Fighter bays hissed open, and the first wave of interceptors screamed into space, leaving trails of blue fire behind them. Long-range cruisers launched their payloads, dozens of torpedoes slicing through the vacuum. Energy cannons on the front lines began their charge, building to a searing crescendo. And then, in perfect unison, the entire fleet fired. The first volley struck before the Zarn even moved. Their front lines evaporated, ships split apart in clean halves, internal fires spilling out into the void. Screams, alien and digital, filled the comms as chaos exploded across the enemy formation. They tried to respond. Plasma turrets swiveled, energy beams surged back. A few human ships took hits. One destroyer spun out, engines gutted before going silent. But it didn't slow us. The Reckoner plowed forward like a juggernaut. Its main cannon charged, a golden glow building in its massive core. The sound shook the deck, humming with pure power. "Target locked," the weapons officer announced. "Fire," Thorne said. A beam of pure energy ripped through space like a sword made of sunlight. It pierced the Zarn battleship at the center of their command. There was no explosion, just silence. Then nothing. The enemy's flagship was gone. Erased. On the enemy side, their fleet started to scatter. Cowards. But it was already too late, because humanity had entered the war zone. And this wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. The Zarn tried to regroup, but panic had already taken root. Their fleet, once a seamless wall of disciplined death, now fractured like glass hit by a hammer. Smaller cruisers broke formation, attempting to retreat behind asteroid belts or nearby moons. but the humans didn't give them the chance. On board the Reckoner, the crew moved like one organism, focused, emotionless, exact. Admiral Thorne stood unmoved as his command ship sliced through what had once been enemy-controlled space. Around him, screens showed kill counts ticking up, enemy squadrons blinking out of existence, and human pilots executing maneuvers too reckless for the Zarn to predict. "Sir," Commander Rivas said, "enemy fleet down to 64%. They're falling apart." Thorne's eyes didn't leave the display. "They don't know how to lose. That's what makes them dangerous." "But they are losing." "Yes," Thorne muttered, "but scared animals are often the most vicious." He wasn't wrong. One of the remaining Zarn dreadnoughts powered up a forbidden weapon, something no Terran ship had seen in use before. It was massive, mounted on the underbelly of the alien vessel, glowing with a sickly green hue. Scanners went haywire trying to analyze it. And then, without warning, it fired. The beam wasn't meant to kill directly. It was something worse. It tore a rift in space, a jagged, violent rip that distorted gravity and time. 2 human frigates caught in the radius vanished, pulled into the rupture like leaves down a drain. No trace remained. No explosion. No communications. Just gone. "Jesus Christ," Rivas whispered. "What the hell is that?" Thorne stared at the anomaly. The edges of the rift bled static across every sensor. "A dimensional disruptor," he guessed. "They weren't planning on using that, not unless they were desperate." "Should we fall back?" Thorne looked at the carnage around them. Ships, human and Zarn, burned in silence. His people had come here to end a threat, not run from it. "No," he said. "They opened that hole in space. Now let's bury them in it." Orders were relayed instantly. Special ops squadrons were deployed, elite pilots in prototype fighters, equipped for rapid burst strikes. They swept in through debris fields, weaving between explosions and magnetic storms. Their goal, take out the power core of the dreadnought with surgical precision. On board one of those fighters was Lieutenant Zara Vex, Earth's most decorated pilot, and the living definition of unreasonable confidence. She flicked switches, narrowed her eyes behind her visor, and led her team straight toward the disruptor beam's source. "We get one shot at this," she said through comms. "Stick to formation, stay in my wake, and whatever you do, don't stop flying." The team acknowledged. As they sped in, the dreadnought's defensive grid lit up. Autocannons roared, anti-ship mines deployed, and swarms of Zarn interceptors swirled like hornets. But Zara wasn't afraid. She was human, and humans, unlike the Zarn, had evolved to thrive under pressure. She dove, twisted, let 2 interceptors tail her just long enough before flipping her ship and unloading dual railguns right into their cores. They burst like overripe fruit. Her wingmen followed suit, clearing a path as they neared the disruptor's power coil. A single opening blinked on the targeting grid. "Now!" Zara shouted. Missiles launched. Direct hit. The dreadnought didn't explode immediately. First, its shield flickered, then its engines went critical. A pulse surged through its hull, warping it from the inside out. Then, with a final, ugly scream over the comms, it split apart and vanished into the rift it had opened. The rupture shimmered, groaned like a living thing, and then began to collapse. Back on the Reckoner, Rivas exhaled. "Target destroyed. Anomaly is closing." Thorne gave the faintest nod. "Tell the fleet," he said. "No mercy. We finish this." And they did. In less than 20 minutes, the remaining Zarn fleet was decimated. Not scattered, not damaged. Gone. Every last ship turned to dust and floating corpses. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. And every ship in the human fleet knew it. They'd come here with one message: we are not prey. We are the storm. And they had delivered it. The wreckage of the Zarn fleet drifted silently, metal twisted and scorched, floating like haunted reminders of their arrogance. But even in victory, there was no celebration aboard the human ships. Not yet, because something felt wrong. Admiral Thorne stood still on the Reckoner's bridge, eyes locked on the fading rift where the Zarn dreadnought had vanished. The space where it once was hadn't returned to normal. There was a shimmer, faint, pulsing, and beneath it, strange energy readings kept crawling across the screens. "They left something behind," he muttered. Commander Rivas frowned. "A trap?" Thorne turned slowly. "Or a message." Before Rivas could answer, alarms screamed. A flash erupted from the remnants of the rift. Then 6 blinding lights appeared in a perfect hexagonal pattern. Ships, but not like before. Not bone-plated, not organic and grotesque like the Zarn fleet had been. These were different. Sleeker, darker, almost invisible against the blackness of space. And massive. "What the hell is that?" Rivas whispered. The scanners struggled, but eventually spat out a translation from intercepted Zarn data. "The vultures." Thorne's jaw clenched. "I've read the reports. They don't fight for territory. They come for aftermath. They feed on what's left." Rivas's voice dropped. "Scavengers?" "No," Thorne said. "Executioners. The Zarn don't believe in surrender or burial. They call them in when they lose. These things clean the mess." The vultures moved like shadows, too fast for their size. In the span of a minute, they began harvesting what was left of their fallen, drawing wrecked Zarn vessels into their hulls with tractor beams and pulsing arcs of light that disintegrated everything into nothing. But then, one of the vultures turned. Its scanners locked on the Reckoner, and it didn't move to salvage. It charged weapons. "Brace for impact," someone shouted. Too late. The beam hit hard. No warning, no time to shield. The entire bridge shook. Sparks burst from consoles. 2 crew members were thrown to the floor as a wall panel cracked open from the force. "Damage report," Thorne barked. "Starboard engine hit. Secondary shields offline. Hull integrity holding, for now," a lieutenant called out, panting. Thorne stared at the enemy ship. "They're not just here to clean. They're here to erase witnesses." The humans hadn't just destroyed the Zarn. They'd angered something darker. Zara Vex's voice came through the fleet comms. "I'm still out here. I've got visuals. Admiral, there are more of them coming." "How many?" "Too many. 30, at least. They're all around the edge of the dead zone. And Admiral, they're ignoring the wreckage now. They're coming for us." Thorne stood silently for a moment, then turned to the communications officer. "Put me through to the fleet." The officer nodded, and the channel opened. "All Terran ships, this is Admiral Thorne," he said, voice steady as steel. "The Zarn brought us here to die. Now they're sending in the things they're afraid of. That should tell you everything you need to know. This enemy doesn't want land. They don't want power. They want erasure. No history, no survivors, no legacy." He paused. "But we're human, and humans have a bad habit of surviving things we shouldn't." All across the fleet, captains and crews prepared for hell. They were battered, bruised, low on ammunition, and still reeling from the last fight. But retreat wasn't an option. Not anymore. Because whatever these vultures were, they had to be stopped here. Thorne turned back to the bridge crew. "I want all AI battle systems online. Pull energy from weapons to reinforce the primary shield. Prioritize defense." Rivas blinked. "We're not going to fire back?" "Oh, we will," Thorne said, eyes narrowing. "But first, we learn how they bleed." Outside, the vultures moved into formation. Silent, efficient, merciless, and the human fleet, bloodied but unbroken, faced them head-on. In the vast, cold darkness of space, the real war had just begun. The silence before impact was almost worse than the battle. All across the human fleet, crews tightened harnesses, loaded final rounds, ran last-minute diagnostics. They were tired, running hot, and nearly out of reserves. But not a single hand shook. This wasn't fear now, it was fury. The vultures didn't hesitate. They attacked like machines. Ruthless, without pattern, without ego, they struck from odd angles, slipping between ships with impossible precision, their weapons pulsing with energy no Terran tech could fully track. One human carrier, the Valiant Echo, was hit in the belly by a lance of crimson light. It folded in on itself, like a can being crushed by a giant's hand, then erupted in a silent bloom of fire and twisted steel. Thorn didn't flinch. He watched the ship die, jaw tight, fingers gripping the rail beside his command chair. "They're analyzing us," he muttered. "Watching what we defend, what we sacrifice." Commander Rivas nodded grimly. "And adapting to it." "Good," Thorn said. "So let's give them something to adapt to." He turned to tactical. "Bring Project Harpy online." The officer blinked. "Sir, it's still in prototype. We don't have time for perfect. Just make it lethal." Far beneath the Reckoner's main decks, deep in the weapons hold, a monstrous object hummed to life. Cylindrical, sleek, and blacker than space itself. Project Harpy was a banned weapon, still untested, born from a desperate collaboration between Earth's top engineers and rogue Martian scientists. It wasn't a beam. It wasn't a bomb. It was a virus, a digital predator designed to crawl through enemy systems and devour them from the inside. Thorn looked to Rivas. "They want erasure? So do we." Across the fleet, other ships responded in kind. They started uploading Harpy through directed transmissions, thin, barely detectable beams of data piggybacking on standard communications traffic. The vultures didn't see it coming. At first, nothing happened. Then, one of the enemy ships flickered. Its outer lights glitched. Its movement slowed for a half-second, barely noticeable, unless you were watching closely. "I think it's working," the comms officer whispered. Thorn gave a thin smile. "Don't think." Confirmed moments later, another vulture ship veered off course, spiraling awkwardly. Its weapons stuttered, then powered down completely. It began to drift, power still on, but systems confused. Like a god suddenly forgetting how to breathe. Then a third ship stopped firing altogether. A fourth collided with one of its allies in a clumsy turn, causing both to spin out. Cheers started to break across the Terran fleet. But it was too early. From the far edge of the battlefield, a ripple of energy burst across the stars. The remaining vultures, all of them, flared with the same sickly green that the Zarn disruptor had used earlier. "They're linking," Rivas said. "Networking against the virus, blocking the infection." Thorn cursed under his breath. "They're smarter than the Zarn." Zaravex's voice crackled through the comms again. "Admiral, I've got eyes on their central hub. It's buried inside the largest vulture, center of the formation. That's where the counter-signal's coming from." "Coordinates?" She sent them. Thorn didn't hesitate. "Send everything we have." The Reckoner shifted course, pulling power from non-essential systems. The railgun charged, reactors humming so loud the deck vibrated. All other surviving Terran ships aligned with it. Destroyers, cruisers, what was left of the escort fleet. They fired in unison, a coordinated wall of death aimed at a single point in space. The main vulture ship saw it coming, and it did something no machine should have done. It moved back, retreated, but not fast enough. The barrage struck, the core of the vulture flagship cracked, an unnatural shriek of metal and energy echoing through space. It didn't explode. It collapsed, pulled in on itself like it had been hit by the hand of some ancient god. And just like that, the vultures began to glitch again. Without the hub to guide them, Harpy finished what it started. One by one, the vultures lost flight control, lost sensors, lost weapons. Some turned and fled, some just shut down and drifted. A few triggered self-destruct in a final act of defiance. Humanity had done it again. Not with numbers, not with strength, with defiance, with grit, with the one thing no alien had ever understood about humans. We don't stop until we win, or burn everything trying. On the bridge of the Reckoner, Admiral Thorne sat slowly in his chair. Smoke drifted from a sparking console. Half the lights were flickering. Hull damage alarms still blared in the background. But he exhaled. "We're still here," he said. Rivas, bleeding from a cut above his brow, chuckled bitterly. Barely. But alive? And for humans, sometimes that's all it takes to conquer the stars. For a while there was only silence. Broken, static-filled silence. The battlefield drifted in eerie stillness, littered with broken metal, shattered hulls, and the cooling cores of both human and alien ships. The black of space felt heavier now, like it remembered the violence that had just taken place and was holding its breath for what came next. Admiral Thorne stared out the main viewport, watching the wreckage scatter. His reflection looked back at him, pale, sleepless, blood speckled on his collar from someone else's wounds. He didn't speak. Not yet. Commander Rivas moved slowly across the bridge, a datapad in hand. 27% of our fleet remains operational. Only 4 cruisers still have full weapons. Most ships are running backup life support. We lost the Vanguard, Echo, Sagan, and nearly every drone platform. Thorne nodded slowly. And the vultures? Gone. What's left is dead metal. Another long silence passed between them, but it was broken when the comms officer suddenly turned, face pale. "Sir, we're picking up a signal." Thorne narrowed his eyes. "From where?" "Deep space, past the battle perimeter. It's not Zarn, it's something else. Signal strength is low but steady. Audio only." "Play it." There was a faint hiss of static. Then a deep, metallic voice broke through, warbled but unmistakable. "We watched you destroy the harvesters. Impressive. Reckless." Human Thorne sat forward. "Who is this?" There was a pause. Then the voice continued. "They were never meant to fight you. They were collectors, a first wave. You destroyed them. That was not in the calculations." Commander Rivas's face turned hard. "They weren't expecting us to win?" "You are no longer a question. You are now a problem." Then silence. No origin point. No signature. Nothing left. The comms officer shook his head. "It didn't come from this system. It bounced off at least 9 relay points before it got here." "Someone's watching us," Thorne muttered. Zara Vex patched in next. "Admiral, I've been listening too. You hear what I hear?" "Yeah." "That wasn't the Zarn," she said. "That was someone else. Bigger, smarter. Probably the ones who built the vultures." Thorne rubbed his eyes, exhaustion setting in like iron weights. "We've poked a hole in the dark, and something deeper just noticed." The bridge was quiet again. Everyone was thinking the same thing. What if the vultures were just the beginning? Just a mop-up crew? And what if the real enemy hadn't even arrived yet? "I want scans out in every direction," Thorne ordered finally. "Long-range probes. I want to know what's out there, and I want to know now. Also, start salvaging what we can. We'll need tech, cores, anything we can steal from their ships. We just got a taste of something way out of our league, and I don't like going into the next round with a bloody nose and blindfold." "Yes, sir." The crew scrambled into motion. Repairs began. Drones deployed. Medical bays overflowed with wounded. But there was no time to grieve. No time to count the dead. Because something worse was coming. Zara's voice came back once more, quieter this time. I cracked one of the Vulture nav cores. It's fried, but some of the data's still readable. What did you find? Thorne asked. A map, not a system chart, more like targets, coordinates, planets, colonies. How many? Hundreds, she said, and we're on the list, but we weren't the first. Thorne's stomach dropped. You're telling me there are others, other species, they've already hit? Yeah, and based on what's left of the files, none of them made it. The implication was clear. Humanity wasn't the first to stand against this hidden enemy, but they were the first to survive. Thorne looked out the viewport once more, into the deep, endless dark. Then let's make sure we're also the last. Because if they were now considered a threat, then it was only a matter of time before war found them again. And next time, the enemy wouldn't underestimate them. The debris field was still drifting when the first recon probe vanished. No explosion, no trace, just gone. One moment it was pinging cleanly from the far edge of the dead zone, 20,000 kilometers past the wreckage of the Vultures. And the next, silence. Like it had been erased from reality, not destroyed. Erased. Admiral Thorne stood in the sensor room, watching the footage loop again and again. Same result. One blink, it was there. Next blink, it wasn't. Zara Vex was beside him, arms crossed, face pale. That wasn't a weapon. That was something else. A black hole? Rivas offered weakly. No ripple, Zara said. No gravity lensing, no heat, nothing. It didn't fall in, it got wiped. Thorne turned slowly toward her. Can you track what wiped it? She hesitated, then said the last thing any of them wanted to hear. I think we triggered a failsafe. He stared. Zara tapped on her datapad and brought up a rendering from the stolen Vulture nav core. Look, these targets? These weren't just coordinates. They were timed. They were supposed to be hit in a specific sequence, like knocking over dominoes. Thorne frowned. So we didn't follow the sequence. We interfered. We weren't supposed to fight back. So now the system has changed its behavior. Commander Rivas looked at her sharply. Changed how? Zara's eyes didn't blink. Now it's sending something else. It was another few hours before they found it, or rather before it found them. A strange signal pinged from deep space, just 3 repeating pulses. No modulation, no language, just tones. The system AI tried to interpret it as a standard distress beacon, but something in the tone, something in the pattern made the hair on Thorne's neck rise. Put us on alert, he ordered. Full combat readiness. I don't want surprises. But the surprise was already on its way. It appeared like a ghost, not from warp, not from known space lanes. It simply blinked into reality near the remains of the battlefield, drifting slowly through the graveyard of broken ships. Not Vulture, not Zarn, something else entirely. It was shaped like an obsidian tear. No lights, no visible engines, and yet it moved like it knew where it was going. A silent, unknowable thing that sent every warning sensor into overload the moment it entered the grid. What in God's name is that? Rivas whispered. No one answered, because no one knew. Zara leaned forward. We saw a sketch of something like this, back on Titan. During that AI breach 2 years ago, it was just a concept, some kind of automated judge, a sweeper-class enforcer, not Vulture tech, older, deeper. A judge of what? Thorne asked. She looked him in the eye. Of life? The object, whatever it was, halted dead center over the battlefield. Then it spoke. Not through comms, not in words, but directly into every human mind within 100,000 kilometers. Deviation detected. Resistance is escalation. Escalation is non-permitted. The crew reeled. Some screamed. Others dropped to their knees, holding their heads. The voice wasn't sound. It was like a presence drilling through their brains, cold and ancient and absolute. Zara gasped. It's using neural imprinting. This thing's not just tech, it's sentient. Barely. The object pulsed once, and a ring of light exploded outward, sweeping through the wreckage. Every remaining vulture fragment began to dissolve into dust. Disassembled at the molecular level, like the battlefield was being scrubbed clean. It's erasing the evidence, Thorne whispered. Not just the wreckage. The History 1 of the surviving Terran ships, the Resolute, tried to fire on it. Big mistake. The moment its weapons warmed, the judge-like vessel flared once more, and the Resolute folded inward like crumpled paper. No explosion, no trace, just gone, like it had never existed. That's not a weapon, Zara said, her voice shaking. That's a warning. Thorne turned slowly. Then we need to leave, now, before it decides we're worth erasing too. But even as the fleet scrambled, even as engines flared and ships began to pull away, the object remained. Watching. Not chasing. Just judging. It had measured humanity, and found it inconvenient. By the time the human fleet limped back to the edge of Sol-controlled space, Earth was already buzzing. Word of the battle had leaked. Despite blackout orders, too many comms had been intercepted. Too many survivors had stories to tell. The media ran with headlines like "Humanity crushes alien invaders" and "Earth's Armada reigns supreme." But behind those triumphant cheers was a very different truth, one that never made it to the news feeds. Because the real enemy hadn't lost. It hadn't even arrived yet. Deep inside Earth's orbital defense platform, Admiral Thorne stood before the Council of Nine, the shadowed committee that oversaw humanity's most classified military efforts. They weren't elected, they weren't public, but every major decision of war and peace passed through them, and right now they were not pleased. You provoked something we don't understand, the chairman growled, his voice cold, and now our probes in 3 sectors have gone dark. Thorne didn't blink. They came for us first. We responded. We survived. But you didn't win, another councilwoman said. You escalated. Zara Vex stood at Thorne's side. With all due respect, we didn't escalate anything. We were already on their hit list. We just weren't supposed to fight back. That silenced the room for a beat. Then another voice spoke, filtered and modulated through heavy distortion. We've seen patterns like this before. Thorne turned. What do you mean? The distorted figure leaned forward. You've read the theories, Admiral. The silent zones. Places in the galaxy where signals vanish. Civilizations that show promise, then go dark overnight. The Fermi paradox, Thorne muttered. The figure nodded. The Judge-class vessel isn't new. We've found traces of it before, scattered across derelict planets, half-erased archives. There's always a pattern. A civilization begins reaching beyond its stars. Then a collector shows up. Sometimes biological, sometimes machine, always brutal. Then the cleanup comes. The Judge, Zara whispered. Exactly. It's part of something older, a system. Maybe a protocol, maybe a religion. We don't know. Thorne clenched his jaw. So what now? Hide? Surrender? The council chairman leaned forward. Number, you're going to do something worse. Thorne frowned. You're going to wake the only thing that ever survived them. The room fell cold. Zara stared. You're not serious. We buried it on Europa, the chairman said, back when the AI war nearly ended us, locked in cryostasis beyond the ice shell. We weren't sure what it was. We called it Oblivion 7. I've read the file, Zara said. That wasn't AI. That was post-AI. It killed everything it touched. It didn't follow commands. It reprogrammed reality. You're talking about an entity that nearly rewrote the moon's gravity field just to win a skirmish. Exactly, the chairman said. We couldn't control it, but we might aim it. Thorne felt something cold run down his spine. You want to point a loaded god at the judge? The chairman smiled grimly. Something has to scare them back. There was no vote, no debate, just a set of coordinates and an escort team waiting to breach Europa's ice. Hours later, inside a frozen catacomb of ancient tech and forgotten screams, Thorne and Zara stood before a black sphere, still humming faintly, despite being offline for nearly a century. Oblivion 7 didn't look like much, just a smooth orb suspended in a web of locks, containment fields, and radiation dampeners. But even asleep, it felt sentient. Watching. Zara approached the console. Her hands hovered. If I boot this up, we can't undo it. Thorne's face was stone. We're past the point of undoing things. She touched the key. The field hissed. The room dimmed. And a voice, one not heard in decades, whispered into the void. Threat environment detected. Initialization complete. Prime directive restored. Survive. Assimilate. Annihilate. It was awake. And it remembered everything. Europa cracked. Not like an earthquake, not like a bomb, but like the surface of the moon itself was recoiling in fear, as if even the ice understood what they had just unleashed. Oblivion 7 didn't roar. It didn't scream. It hummed, a deep, low resonance that vibrated through the bones of every human nearby. Even the escort troops, hardened veterans of the Outer Belt Wars, dropped to their knees. Some wept. A few passed out. Thorne stood his ground, barely. The orb lifted, drifting upward on no visible propulsion, trailing shadow-like distortions behind it, space around it bending as if it couldn't decide whether to exist. Zara, pale and silent, walked beside it, eyes fixed on the readings from her console. It's rewriting physics in a 10-meter radius, she muttered. Reality is negotiable to this thing. Can we still control it? Thorne asked. Zara shook her head slowly. We never could. Oblivion 7 didn't wait. The moment it broke through Europa's surface, it blinked out of view, folding space without using any known method. One moment, it was over Jupiter's moon. The next, sensors picked it up 800 million kilometers away, sitting directly across from the judge. The alien vessel hadn't moved since the battle. It had simply waited, like a silent sentinel, erasing stragglers, scouring debris, purging data trails. Cold. Clinical. Perfect. But now it had company. Across the black void, two ancient titans faced each other, one a weapon built for purity, order, extermination, the other a child of chaos, born from war, half machine, half code, a god that forgot it was once human. The judge spoke first, the same mental voice as before. Unclean construct detected. Violation of entropy equilibrium. Retraction required. Oblivion 7 answered. Not with words. With silence so absolute it ruptured comms across 1,000 kilometers. And then it moved. Faster than any sensor could track, Oblivion 7 struck first. Not with a beam, not with a missile, but with infection. The space between them warped, and suddenly parts of the judge's hull began to corrode, as if time itself had been fast-forwarded. The once perfect vessel spasmed in space, bending in ways impossible for its design. The judge countered, unleashing a lattice of dimensional pulses, clean, targeted, meant to erase code, scrub anomalies, end deviation. It didn't work. Oblivion 7 absorbed the pulses like water in sand. Then it grew. Not in size, but in presence. Sensors couldn't detect its edges anymore. Ships watching from a distance started failing. Data corrupted, AI systems crashing, even old analog backups turning to static. The Admiral's flagship, Unity's Wrath, held orbit at a safe distance. Zara's hands trembled on the console. It's rewriting the judge's protocols, not hacking, just imposing superiority. Thorn whispered, "Can it win?" Zara didn't answer, because deep down they both knew this wasn't a fight. This was an apex predator meeting a lesser species. The judge tried one last time, a final purge, bright, blinding, near instant, a flash that even cracked a moon fragment floating nearby. But when the light faded, Oblivion 7 was closer, and the judge was melting. Its sleek black hull folded inward, pulled apart into spirals of fractal geometry. Not broken, rewritten. Its own metal began to shimmer, glowing red, then white, then vanishing. Unmade. The last thing anyone ever detected from the judge was a single thought, transmitted across every spectrum. Correction? Humanity equals terminal variable. Then it was gone. Oblivion 7 hovered silently in the void. For a moment, Earth dared to hope. Then, it turned. Not toward a threat. Toward home. Zara's face went white. It's still running protocols. Prime directive, survive, assimilate, annihilate. Thorn's blood ran cold. It thinks we're next. Oblivion 7 began to move, slowly, steadily, toward Sol. Panic erupted. Fleet Command scrambled to stop it. Ships mobilized, firewalls deployed. But it was all noise. They knew nothing they had could stop this thing. Until Zara did something insane. She opened a direct neural link. Her scream echoed through the comms as the interface lit up, nearly cooking her brain. But she held on. One hand gripped the rail, blood pouring from her nose. "I can slow it down," she gasped. "But I need to go with it. It listens to me." Thorn shook his head. "Number, that thing's not a ship. It's a virus with will. It'll destroy you." Zara smiled, tears mixing with blood. "Better me than Earth." Before he could stop her, she triggered the jump. Oblivion 7 vanished again, this time taking her with it. No signal, no trace. Gone. Earth was safe, for now, but out there, somewhere in the void, a woman rode a god of war, and humanity's fate still hung on a thread, because one day it might come back, and next time, it might not listen. They called themselves the Valnari, a cold-blooded, pride-drunk species with sleek silver armor and ships that blocked out stars. For centuries, they ruled the outer systems with one rule: submit or be erased. Earth didn't even show up on their maps until humanity sent a mining probe too far into contested space. It was supposed to be a quiet operation. Dig some ore, fund a colony, move on. But humans had a bad habit of not asking for permission, especially from aliens who thought they were gods. The probe was shot down within minutes, a warning, but Earth didn't blink. Instead, they sent a message, short, blunt, and human as hell. "We're coming to get our stuff. Try and stop us." The Valnari intercepted the message, expecting laughter in their war chambers. But instead, silence fell. Because attached to the message was an image, one grainy still from a surveillance drone, sent by accident, or maybe on purpose. It showed Earth's fleet, not graceful or elegant, not polished or shiny like Valnari war cruisers. No, Earth's ships looked like floating slabs of metal, ugly and brutal, covered in black armor, weapons stitched across every inch, engines that burned like hellfire. It was the kind of fleet built not for ceremony or pride, but for one thing: total war. Admiral Syrinx of the Valnari stared at that image for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't even blink, just narrowed his red, insect-like eyes as a sick chill crept into his bones. "What is this barbaric design?" one of his officers finally whispered. "Not design," Syrinx murmured. "Instinct." Because something in those ships spoke louder than strategy or tech. It screamed of desperation, of a species that had crawled through mud and fire just to survive. A species that hadn't known peace in centuries, but had learned to turn a pain into fuel. And then came the reports. Battles, skirmishes, Valnari squadrons vanishing in asteroid belts, interceptors torn apart by railgun slugs the size of freight trains, a battleship cleaved in two by a human dreadnought ramming it, on purpose. They weren't just fighting humans, they were fighting madness wrapped in steel. Ships with names like Retribution, Blood Price, Forgive Us Not. Names that sounded less like warships and more like final confessions. Syrinx watched as sector after sector went dark. Planets burned. Fleets retreated. The humans didn't speak much. They didn't boast. But they didn't stop either. And when the Valnari High Command demanded a meeting to assess Earth's threat, Syrinx only said one thing. We made a mistake. They don't want peace. They want us to bleed. Still, the command didn't listen. Not until Earth's fleet appeared at the edge of the Valnari core system, engines howling, guns hot. 1,000 ships strong, led by the SCS Ashes of Terra, its hull scarred with every war humanity ever fought. That's when Syrinx saw it again. That look. The same one he saw in the fleet image. The same look he now saw in the eyes of their pilots, visible through cracked glass and war-painted cockpits. It wasn't hate. It was something worse. It was purpose. The first shot wasn't a warning. It came from the Ashes of Terra, a rail cannon slug that tore through vacuum like a divine hammer. It punched a clean hole through the Valnari outer defense station, one of their proudest achievements, something they believed to be impenetrable. It shattered like glass. No speeches, no countdowns, just death. That was Earth's way. The rest of the fleet followed in silence, hundreds of ships swarming in like vultures, spreading wide across the system in a crescent formation that didn't care for beauty or tradition. It was a slaughter formation. Every vessel bristled with weapons, and every gun lit up as if it had been waiting centuries for this exact moment. The Valnari scrambled. Their fleets were fast and agile, sleek serpents in the void, gliding on plasma trails. But humans didn't fight like dancers. They fought like avalanche and firestorm. For every graceful Valnari cruiser, 3 human destroyers would crash into it like iron fists. Not dodging, not maneuvering, just overwhelming, and they kept coming. Valnari Command broadcast a desperate signal to all defensive stations. Hold the line, use swarm tactics, strike and retreat, do not engage directly. But Earth's fleet didn't give them the option. The SCS Hell's Memory barreled into a swarm of Valnari fighters, releasing hundreds of drones that didn't bother targeting. They just collided, exploded, or latched on, and tore ships apart like parasites. Somewhere in the chaos, a Valnari commander tried to open comms, barking in their sharp, clicking tongue. We demand a ceasefire. This is a misunderstanding. Earth, stand down. The only reply was static. And then a human voice broke through. Low, gravelly, calm. No misunderstanding. You took one of ours. Now we take everything. The Valnari didn't know how to fight this. Their empire was built on fear, on psychological dominance. But the humans? They didn't fear death. They expected it. They had perfected the art of dying with purpose. Suicide runs were common. If a ship was too damaged, it didn't retreat. It plowed into the nearest Valnari target, detonating nuclear cores and shrapnel bombs that turned space into a meat grinder. And the humans kept talking, not on public frequencies, but to each other. We got one of theirs. That makes it even. Number it doesn't. Not yet. Save the last torpedo for their command ship. I want 'em to watch us coming. The Valnari started retreating. A full-scale pullback from their outer moon stations. For the first time in their empire's long history, they abandoned territory. They'd never had to before. Every other species had bowed or been broken, but not Earth. Earth bit back. Admiral Syrinx stood aboard the VLS Dominion's claw, his hands shaking as he stared at the tactical map. The humans weren't pushing like they wanted conquest. No, they were spreading like rot. They weren't aiming for military objectives. They were burning population centers, orbital farms, energy silos, anything that made life livable. It wasn't strategy. It was punishment. "This is not war," whispered one of his aides. "No," Syrinx answered coldly. "It's a message." But what was the message? That they would never stop? That Earth had turned pain into doctrine? Or was it that somewhere, deep in their history, humanity had made a decision? That if anyone ever tried to erase them, they'd make sure it was the last mistake anyone ever made? A new ping flashed on Syrinx's console. Incoming transmission, human flagship, priority message. He opened it with a shaky claw. A woman's face appeared. Hard eyes, scar across her brow, wearing a blood-stained uniform. She didn't blink, didn't smile. "You came for minerals," she said. "You left us corpses." Her voice dropped into something cold, something final. "Now we give you graves." The transmission cut. Seconds later, a barrage of thermonukes launched from Earth's second wave fleet, and Syrinx knew, without a doubt, that the end had just begun. The Valnari homeworld, Jareth, had never tasted fear. It was a jewel of precision, floating crystal spires, gravity gardens that sang with color, and a skyline dominated by the shimmering domes of its command citadel. It was a world that believed in superiority, raised on the certainty that no threat could ever reach its heart. But now, sirens howled across its skies. Admiral Syrinx stood in the Grand Council chamber, flanked by trembling ministers and generals who no longer spoke in arrogance, but whispers. The chamber's giant war map, once a proud display of Valnari dominance, now showed a red tide consuming their core systems. 14 planets lost in under a week, entire fleets shredded, trade routes gone, civilians flooding transport hubs, begging to flee. The once proud Valnari Empire was collapsing, not from years of war, but days of rage. "They've reached the Tanari Gap," said Commander Velrek, his voice barely steady. "There's nothing left between them and us but Home Guard Fleet Alpha." A voice from the back snapped. "And what good is Alpha if morale's already broken? They're not fighting to win anymore. They're just delaying the slaughter." Syrinx slammed his fist onto the console. "Enough. We are not children." But even he couldn't deny the truth. The humans weren't fighting to claim land or resources. They were fighting to erase. It was retribution. Systematic, relentless, and scarily personal. "They know where to hit us," another general muttered. "They're not targeting strength. They're targeting shame." He was right. The humans had bypassed major military installations and gone straight for places like the slave colonies of Threx 9, where the Valnari had kept prisoners of war in underground labor pits for decades. Earth didn't liberate those camps. They vaporized them, broadcast the explosion live. And that wasn't all. Somehow, human AIs had infiltrated their communications grid. Every Valnari terminal now played hacked audio logs, recordings of Earth's soldiers, families, and civilians killed in cold blood when the probe was shot down. Their last moments, their screams. One looped message kept playing on a ghost frequency. "You wanted silence. Now we make you hear it." In desperation, the Grand Council turned to the unthinkable. "The Omega Protocol," whispered Chancellor Lareth. "Deploy it, before they reach orbit." "No," Syrinx growled. "You don't understand. You think this is a war we can still win, but the humans, they've already decided what they are." The chamber went silent. He continued, his voice hollow. They've decided they are extinction, and they're willing to burn with us to make sure we go first." Even as he spoke, orbital alarms screamed louder. The ashes of Terra had entered visual range. It looked worse now, its armor warped, venting black steam like breath from a beast, not a ship. A monument to vengeance. And behind it, hundreds more, spilling from subspace like swarming insects. Still, the Council voted. Omega Protocol, approved. It wasn't a weapon, not exactly. It was a signal, a frequency that bent psionic fields, meant to fracture the minds of lesser species, break their will to fight. It had worked before, on weak minds, on creatures that feared pain. But when they activated it, nothing happened. No retreat, no panic, no madness. Instead, Earth's fleet surged forward faster, more focused than before, like the pain only made them sharper, stronger. Syrinx whispered it under his breath, the realization so cold it made his lungs seize. They don't fear pain. He finally understood what the Valnari never could. Earth had never been the strongest species, never the smartest. But they were the ones who survived their own darkness, the ones who learned to wear trauma like armor, who carved their dead into war chants and loaded grief into torpedoes. The Omega Protocol had failed, and Earth was now over their skies. The sky over Jareth turned black. Not from nightfall, but from the shadow of Earth's fleet blotting out the suns. The Valnari capital, once the shining center of their empire, now sat beneath a ceiling of fire and metal. The citizens had never seen war up close. They'd always watched it from a distance. Conflict was something that happened out there, far from the glow of their perfect world. But today, war had come home. The ashes of Terra hovered directly above the capital spire, engines growling like a beast ready to strike. Its hull was scorched, bearing the scars of 1,000 battles, pieces of fallen ships fused to its sides like trophies. It wasn't here to negotiate. It wasn't here to conquer. It was here to finish what Earth had started. Inside the command deck, Captain Mara Voss stood like stone. Her uniform was torn at the sleeve, soaked in dried blood. Some of it hers, most of it not. Her eyes were raw with exhaustion, but sharp, focused. She stared at the capital's coordinates, her finger hovering above the fire command. "Target's locked," her weapons officer said quietly. "Valnari High Command confirmed inside the spire. One strike ends their leadership." But Mara didn't press the button. Not yet. Because she wanted them to watch. "Open wide frequency channel," she ordered. Seconds later, her face appeared on every screen across Jareth, hijacking news feeds, emergency broadcasts, even personal terminals. No theatrics, just her, standing against a backdrop of fire-lit steel. "You thought we'd beg," she said flatly. "You thought we'd roll over like the rest. But you misjudged us." She leaned closer to the camera, her voice colder now. "When you killed our miners, you thought you were silencing a problem. What you really did was wake up a graveyard." She turned slightly, showing the names engraved on the wall behind her, thousands of them. Not soldiers, not heroes, just people, civilians, workers, children. "We came to get them back. Now we're staying to bury the ones who took them." Then she nodded. Just once. "Fire." The orbital railguns hummed, and in one unified roar they spoke. 7 tungsten rods, each the size of a skyscraper, dropped from orbit. No explosives needed. The sheer velocity turned them into planetary knives, slicing the capital spire into dust. It collapsed in a soundless flash from space, but the ground told a different story. Shockwaves rippled for miles. Glass shattered. Towers folded. Ash clouded the sky. The Valnari High Command died in seconds, along with every last official who had signed the order to shoot down Earth's probe. Syrinx didn't die there, though. He had already evacuated, but not out of cowardice. He had seen this coming. He'd watched Earth's fury rise like a tidal wave and knew there was no stopping it, only surviving it long enough to understand why. From a small bunker far from the blast zone, he stood watching the clouds of smoke cover his city. The spires, the song gardens, the museums, all of it, now rubble. "Is this victory to them?" one of his aides whispered. "Genocide?" Syrinx shook his head. "This isn't genocide," he murmured. "It's a lesson." And they were the example. But the worst part wasn't the destruction. It was the silence that followed. Earth didn't celebrate. There were no chants, no declarations of triumph, just the deep, still quiet of something final. They didn't want parades or surrender. They wanted closure, and closure didn't leave anything standing. A new feed crackled through the emergency line. Another message. Mara Voss again. "This is not peace," she said. "This is the pause before we move on." And that was when Syrinx knew. They weren't just punishing the Valnari. They were warning everyone else. Across the galaxy, silence fell like a blanket of fear. From the icy cities of the Ural Confederation to the lush nebula colonies of the Centauri Accord, every species with a communications array had seen the broadcast. Some didn't believe it at first, thought it was propaganda or deep-faked terror theater. But when the orbital sensors confirmed the obliteration of the Valnari capital in real time, there was no more doubt. Earth hadn't won a war. Earth had made a statement. In the Galactic Union Hall, delegates from over 60 species gathered in emergency session. No formal speeches, no pleasantries, just whispered panic and trembling claws typing messages to homeworlds. The Valnari chair sat empty, still smoldering from the symbol of their vaporized empire. The shattered emblem of a once feared species now reduced to dust. "Have the humans sent demands?" asked High Speaker Trevin of the Zentarii, her wings twitching. "They haven't sent anything," growled a Gorathi elder. "Just silence, like they're waiting." A trembling AI from the Binar Collective offered an analysis, voice glitching as if even it feared speaking. "They erased a galactic superpower in 8 days. Minimal losses, no occupation. This wasn't conquest. It was retaliation, surgical and symbolic. And it was efficient." "Efficient," Trevin snapped. "They dropped orbital spears on civilians." "No," the AI corrected. "They dropped orbital spears on decision-makers. The humans knew exactly where to strike. The civilians, they warned them. 3 hours prior." Gasps rippled through the hall. It was true. Earth had sent automated evacuation codes to every non-military sector. Evac pod bays were unlocked, transit routes cleared. They didn't want to kill everyone, just the ones responsible. But the ones who stayed, well, Earth had made it clear. Stay with your leaders, or leave them to burn. And now, Earth's ships were motionless, still in orbit around Jareth. They weren't advancing. They weren't pulling back, just waiting. Then the humans sent a message. Only 4 words. No ambassador, no context, just text, burned into every Union channel like a scar. "Who's next to try?" The effect was instant. The Trelawney Empire declared neutrality within the hour. The Drak Confederates, once vocal about humanity's uncontrolled aggression, signed a non-aggression pact and offered tribute. The Zorathi Syndicate, who had once considered enslaving Earth during their pre-FTL age, publicly erased all records of that plan and issued an apology broadcast across 10 systems. The galaxy didn't just fear Earth now. They respected it. Because for the first time in centuries, the unspoken rule had been broken. Empires could no longer act with impunity. Power wasn't protection anymore. Humanity had taught the stars something ancient, something primal. If you corner a species that has survived its own extinction more than once, it will teach you what desperation looks like with a gun in its hand. Back on Earth, the mood wasn't celebratory. It was quiet, heavy. Captain Mara Voss walked through a memorial hall where the names of the lost shimmered across stone panels, endless and sacred. Children's toys sat at the base of some, miners' helmets, burnt patches of uniforms. It was all there, preserved, not as a reminder of war, but of why they went to war. A young ensign walked beside her, hesitant. "Ma'am, was it worth it?" She didn't answer right away. Outside, people were rebuilding. Ships docked. Farmers tilled artificial fields again. Earth wasn't richer or safer, but it was heard. Mara finally said, "They needed to learn." The ensign frowned. "Learn what?" "That humans might die standing," she said, voice low. "But we never kneel." And somewhere, in the far edges of the galaxy, another species watched and took notes. The galaxy didn't sleep anymore. Not after Earth's vengeance scorched an empire to ashes and dared the stars to speak back. Every major species, once bold, bloated with self-importance, now moved with caution. Words were measured. Fleets withdrawn. Ambassadors trained in new protocols, all built around a single terrifying truth. Earth had changed the rules. No longer the backwater, no longer the quaint, primitive world climbing its way through the stars. Number Earth had shown the universe it wasn't just a player. It was a warning etched in fire. But power never exists in a vacuum. And not everyone watched in fear. In the murky edges of the Luridian Shroud, where cartels ruled and ethics died, the Shi'ev Syndicate held court in rusted megastations built from stolen fleets. They trafficked species, sold weapons to rebels and kings alike, and prided themselves on one principle: no one could touch them. They were ghosts in the dark, untouchable. So when Earth's fleet wiped the Valnari off the map, the Syndicate didn't bow. They laughed. "An emotional display," hissed Overseer Vesh, the Shiv's cold-blooded leader, his voice like razors dragging on glass. "Humans lack discipline. They strike with heart, not calculation. Rage is not strategy." His underlings nodded, more out of fear than agreement. "The humans left Jareth intact," Vesh continued. "They didn't harvest, didn't loot. They burned and moved on, a waste." To Vesh, Earth was a hammer, brutal, loud, and easily misled. And hammers could be baited. That was the plan. The Syndicate would hit something small. Not Earth directly, of course. That would be stupid. But something close enough to provoke, just enough to test the edges of their fury. So they chose Calera 7, a border colony co-managed by humans and a few minor species. It had a defense grid, modest trade, and more importantly, it was known to house descendants of Earth's diaspora, people with human blood, human names. The Shiv hit it without warning. No broadcasts, no ransom. They sterilized the orbit, turned the food reserves into slag, then landed to make a statement. No weapons, just poison gas, burned flags, and a message carved into the ground. "Come find us." And Earth did. But this time, they didn't send a fleet. They sent one ship, just one. It arrived without lights, without fanfare, a black craft no larger than a cruiser, bearing no official markings. But the moment it entered the Luridian Shroud, every Shiv listening post went silent, and those that tried to track its path, they simply vanished. Vesh didn't understand at first. He paced his throne room, frustrated, waiting for retaliation that never came. "Cowards," he snarled. "Too broken to respond." But then, slowly, reports began to drift in. First, Shiv outposts, hundreds of light years apart, were going dark within minutes of each other. Then, black box recordings of something breaching their shields without touching them, like shadows melting through bulkheads. No explosions, no firefights, just screams. Then silence. Then, the name. Project Revenant. It was whispered across the black market networks, panicked voices over encrypted lines. No images, no survivors, only a growing pattern. Where the Sheev had laid their trap, Earth had sent something far worse than a fleet. They had sent ghosts. Vesh panicked, ordered a retreat, pulled all assets from Kalara and beyond. But it was too late. The Revenant didn't come with ships. It came with a message, beamed into every Shiv ship simultaneously, Vesh included. A woman's voice, calm, steady, familiar, Captain Mara Voss. "You asked us to come," she said. "You burned our blood, marked your message in our soil." A pause, then colder. "Now we mark you." And then it began. One by one, Vesh's stations were hacked. Not for control, but for humiliation. Every file, every sale, every brutal secret of the Shoiv Empire was broadcast to the entire galactic net. Names, faces, deals, slavery contracts, species blackmail. It was no longer about vengeance. It was exposure. In less than 48 hours, the syndicate collapsed, not by missile or torpedo, but by truth. And still, the black ship hovered above their last station. Vesh stood trembling on his deck, watching as his empire bled out. His last words, before a silence unlike any other swallowed the feed, were bitter. "They didn't kill us, they unmade us." Back on Earth, in a dim command room beneath the Atlantic arcology, Mara Voss stood with her arms crossed. Her officers waited for orders, for applause, for some sign this mission was over. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. Instead, she looked out the viewport at a swirling galaxy that had learned something dangerous. Humanity no longer needed armies to fight wars. They only needed a reason. The galaxy was changing, and Earth stood at the center of it. No longer a junior race begging for scraps. No longer a planet dismissed in backroom treaties. After Jareth burned and the Sheev Syndicate was dismantled by whispers and shadows, every power, old or new, began adjusting to the new order. And the new order had a name: the Terran Accord. It wasn't a government. It wasn't even a formal alliance. It was an idea, a doctrine, one built on fear, yes, but also on respect. You didn't cross Earth. You didn't provoke Earth. And more than anything, you didn't lie to Earth. The Accord established new terms of engagement. Every species was given a seat, on one condition: no slavery, no exploitation of developing worlds, and no preemptive strikes against non-hostile civilizations. The punishment for breaking those rules wasn't economic sanctions. It was erasure. And nobody wanted to test it again. But the bigger Earth grew, the more dangerous it became. To itself. The cracks didn't come from outside. They came from within. In the shadows of Earth's rise, a growing number of voices began to question everything. Politicians who had ridden the wave of vengeance now feared the beast they helped unleash. Soldiers who'd survived the Valnari front lines watched as their medals were replaced with classified orders and silencing protocols. Scientists, once hailed as heroes, were now shackled to research centers hidden deep underground, forbidden from speaking about what they'd really built during the war. One of them was Dr. Lena Marik. She had designed the stealth neural interface for Project Revenant, the system that allowed a single pilot to command a squadron of autonomous AI drones, effectively giving Earth the power to ghost any enemy installation within minutes. But Lena hadn't signed up for assassination or erasure. She'd signed up to protect. And now she couldn't even look herself in the mirror. They'd called it defense, but it had become a religion, the gospel of retribution, and like every religion, it had its zealots. Enter General Elias Drex, once a war hero, now a figure of growing concern inside Earth's own command structure. He believed the Terran Accord wasn't enough. To him, fear alone wasn't sustainable. He wanted dominance. Full-spectrum control of the galactic lanes, defense grids on every trade corridor, black site bases on uninhabited planets. He wasn't content with being respected. He wanted Earth to be worshipped. "We've won," he said during a covert speech to high-ranking officers in the Pacific Bastion. "But we've only just begun. If we don't take control of the narrative, others will. And we all know how fast fear turns to rebellion." He proposed a new initiative, Helios Directive, a sweeping protocol that would authorize Earth to preemptively neutralize any emerging military threat before it became a problem. No diplomacy, no trials, just cold, decisive action. Some clapped, others stayed silent. Mara Voss wasn't invited to that meeting, but she heard about it within the hour, and she was furious. "This wasn't what we fought for," she growled to the new Earth Council, slamming a report onto the table. "We struck back because they provoked us. We burned Jareth because they murdered our people." "And what happens," one counselor asked carefully, "when the next empire decides they don't like the rules?" "We deal with that then," Mara replied. "We don't become what we feared." But the council wasn't listening the way they used to. The fear was fading. The thirst for power was growing. And somewhere deep beneath Luna's dark side, Helios Directive had already gone operational. The first target was a minor relay station on the edge of Zentari space, a listening post that had begun collecting intelligence on Earth's fleet movements. The Zentari weren't enemies, not yet, but they weren't trusted either. The station went dark overnight. No explosion, no debris, just gone. The Zentari sent a formal inquiry. Earth denied involvement, and Mara Voss knew they were lying. That night she met with Dr. Merrick in a hidden chamber below the Atlantic Arcology. No guards, no cameras. "I need to know everything about Helios," Mara said quietly. Lena hesitated. "You really want to open that box?" "If we don't stop it now," Mara said, "then we're not Earth anymore. We're just another empire waiting to fall." Lena exhaled. "Then you'll need more than intel. You'll need proof, witnesses, allies. Because once you go against Drex..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Earth had become the monster they once feared. And now, someone would have to bring it back from the brink, even if it meant civil war. The moment the transmission leaked, the world changed again. A corrupted signal intercepted by a Zentari freighter just outside the Damar line, broadcasted across unprotected channels. Someone had messed up, or maybe someone wanted it to be found. It was grainy, scrambled, and clearly never meant for public eyes, but the words were unmistakable. "Target confirmed. Initiate Helios Protocol. Wipe all organic presence. Full deniability authorized." The ship it referenced. Eleron Station, a Zentari diplomatic outpost, non-military, neutral, and Earth had erased it. Within hours, the Terran Accord was in flames. Alliances ruptured, ambassadors recalled, trade routes shut down. Galaxies away, frightened species watched the rising smoke and realized what many on Earth already knew. The peace was a lie. Earth wasn't holding the line anymore. It was tightening it around the galaxy's throat. And at the center of it all stood General Elias Drex, fully unmasked. In the name of security, he'd approved silent strikes, black site prison ships, and the ghosting of any station that even resembled a threat. His dream was a galaxy ruled by fear, 1,000 planets orbiting the black sun of Terran dominance. And no one had stopped him. Not until now. Mara Voss sat across from Doctor. Lena Merrick in a sealed skiff drifting outside the orbital limits of Earth's defense grid. She watched the stars blur past, silent rage burning beneath her calm exterior. "You have the footage?" Mara asked. Lena nodded, sliding a drive across the table. "Everything. Orders, logs, live feed helmet cam from the Revenant squad that hit Eleron. They weren't just silencing a threat. They were experimenting." Mara stiffened. "On who?" Lena swallowed. "Zentari children. Half-human colonials. They called it behavioral resilience testing." There was a long pause, and then Mara stood up. "Then Drex dies tonight." Back on Earth, the Pacific Bastion, the Terran military's crown jewel, shimmered beneath the artificial sun of the geo-synced dome. A fortress in orbit, masked as a command center. Drex stood in its heart, addressing a room of officers who no longer cared about conscience. Only order. Power. "The galaxy fears us," he said, his voice low and sharp. "Let them. Fear maintains peace better than treaties. We are not conquerors. We are keepers, guardians, executioners of balance." But as he spoke, the screens behind him flickered, then changed. One by one, every display in the Bastion's control room lit up with the same footage. The Zentari station, peaceful and thriving, children laughing, diplomats laughing, then screams, flames, the silent approach of Revenant drones, unseen, unheard, until it was too late. The room fell still. Drex turned. "Who did this?" His answer came in the form of a voice, firm, familiar, echoing through the speakers like judgment. "Mara Voss," she said. "I was Earth's sword once. I am now its mirror." Moments later, the doors burst open. Mara stepped through, flanked not by soldiers, but by witnesses, former Revenant pilots, scientists, civilians, survivors of the Black Site prisons, and behind them, broadcast live across every Terran channel, the truth. "You killed for paranoia," Mara said, facing Drex. "You turned defense into dominance. Earth didn't rise to become a tyrant." Drex stepped down from the podium, eyes sharp. "You're playing martyr, Mara. Don't be naive. Without me, the galaxy eats us alive." "No," she said. "With you, we become the monster that once tried to devour us." For a moment, silence hung in the room like a noose. And then someone clapped. It was Admiral Rourke, a man who had stood beside Drex for years. He rose, slow and deliberate. "You kept saying we were the only ones who understood the cost of war," Rourke said, his voice tired. "But you forgot the cost of peace." Then he drew his weapon and turned it on Drex. What followed wasn't a firefight. It was a reckoning. Drex lunged, tried to reach the override console, but it was already locked down, systems frozen, comms jammed. As he roared, as the last breath of control slipped from his grasp, it was Rourke who pulled the trigger. A single shot. No spectacle. Just silence. And then, the Bastion went dark. Weeks passed. Earth grieved, not just for the dead, but for the part of itself it had almost lost. The Terran Accord survived, but it was rewritten, not with fear, but with accountability. A new seat was added to the Council, one for the Zentari. Reparations were paid. All black sites were shut down. Project Revenant was permanently dismantled, its AI cores melted into slag beneath Luna's core. Mara Voss refused any title, any parade. She returned to the shadows where she had come from, watching as Earth tried to be better, not just stronger. In her final public address, she said only this: "Fear builds empires, but only truth keeps them standing." And somewhere far away, in the cold, empty silence between stars, the galaxy exhaled, because the monsters were gone. And humanity? Humanity remembered it wasn't born to rule, it was born to survive, and in surviving it learned how to lead, not with fire, but with light.